People need to hear the same core idea often enough, clearly enough for it to stick. When every touch point gives them a slightly different version, the brand starts asking people to work too hard. But people don't. Brand drift is one of those problems a lot of businesses are living with, but they don't know quite how to name. They know the brand feels a bit off. Things aren't as sharp as they used to be. They can see bits of inconsistency creeping in, but it rarely looks serious enough to stop and deal with properly. And that's the problem with brand drift. It shows up as a few small things that are easy to excuse at the time. Then those things start becoming normal. Before long, the business is still producing work, launching campaigns, updating the website, but the brand has started to lose its shape. And AI has made that drift faster. It's now much easier to create more pages, more posts, more sales material, more variations of everything, which is useful until the business accidentally creates 50 slightly different versions of itself. A really simple example is a sales deck. At some point, someone adapts it for a specific pitch, and that's fair enough. Then someone else uses that version because it feels more useful than the official one. Then a few months later, there's 5 versions of the deck floating around, all describing the business slightly differently, and nobody is completely sure which one is right. And it's usually not caused by people being careless. In fact, it's often the opposite. Most drift happens because people are trying to get work done under pressure, and the brand isn't built into the way the business actually operates. The strategy might exist along with guidelines and positioning, but if people can't use those quickly and confidently when they're under pressure, they'll improvise. Some of that improvisation can be useful because it might show you where the brand is under strain. If sales keeps changing the story, maybe the positioning is too abstract or the offer isn't clear enough. That's why the cause matters. There's a difference between useful adaptation and uncontrolled drift. The damage starts when the business begins making up little versions of the brand all over the place. Sales says one thing, website says another, and your customer is left trying to do the joining up themselves. It matters commercially because brands work through repeated signals. People need to hear the same core idea often enough, clearly enough for it to stick. When every touch point gives them a slightly different version, the brand starts asking people to work too hard. But people don't. They don't sit there lovingly piecing together your positioning like it's a fun Sunday afternoon jigsaw. They feel a little bit less certain. They remember you a bit less clearly and trust you a bit less quickly. That can show up as more expensive acquisition, softer conversion, longer sales conversations, and internally teams start arguing over things that should have been settled years ago, which is always a lovely use of everyone's time. The dangerous bit is that businesses often misread what's happening. They see messy execution and reach for a visual refresh, another workshop, or a new set of brand guidelines. Sometimes those things help, but if the actual problem is brand drift, they won't hold for long because the same patterns creep back in when the system around the brand hasn't changed. And that's why I think the first move should be diagnosis. Before you start fixing things, you need to know where the drift is coming from. Is the brand unclear at the foundations? Are teams interpreting it differently? Are the tools useless? Maybe no one even owns the standard. When are approvals happening? Are they too late, too randomly, or not at all? And this is where brand drift gets really useful because sorting out a drifting brand can expose deeper issues. If the defined brand isn't being implemented consistently, it's hard to know whether the brand itself is wrong or whether the business simply isn't applying it properly. You can end up blaming the strategy when the problem is execution, or blaming execution when the strategy was never clear enough to survive contact with the real world. Those are different problems, and treating them all as we need better guidelines is how businesses waste money and end up back in the same conversation 6 months later, only now they've got a nicer PDF. This is the territory I've been building around brand ops. The point isn't to make brand more precious or bureaucratic. It's to make it usable so it can survive contact with sales, marketing, agency, AI tools, and the normal mess of growing a business. If it can't, it will drift. Not necessarily because the brand is weak on paper, but because the business hasn't built the habits and the tools to keep it consistent. So if your brand feels less clear than it used to, or if the work going out the door feels like it's coming from slightly different versions of the same company, don't jump straight to a rebrand. Start asking where drift is happening, what caused it, and how far it's traveled. There's loads more about brand drift on the Xray site, including signs to look for and how the stages of drift develop. If you want a proper read on where your own brand is losing consistency, we have a brand signal scan that's built for exactly that. It gives you a diagnosis before you start spending time and money fixing the wrong thing.